Well, in a sense, the same thing happened because Stanis wrote a draft and then he gave it to me and then I fixed it. And so what we have here is, I left his name in the front, but this is the kind of work that we are doing on these indigenous green leafy vegetables is work that I initiated and which we are continuing. Yeah. So, what is happening now, I think, is increasing the recognition of the role of green leafy vegetables. So we're talking about green leaves that we eat, either raw or cooked, and increasing recognition of the importance of these that have always been critical to traditional diets, because in Papua New Guinea the traditional diets have been largely a root crop and a green leafy vegetable. This is the basis of the food, daily diet of people. These may be grown in the garden or they may be harvested from wild resources, and they become more critical in times of stress. So at times of drought, frost in the high altitudes, in times of nutritional stress, the green leafy vegetables become more important. And so the indigenous greens are becoming more recognized because with colonialism, I mean, we got inundated with cabbages and Chinese cabbages and lettuces and cabbages and more cabbages. But people being more sensible than colonial European colonialists, people retained their own indigenous green vegetables. So now we are beginning more and more to recognize that these are the things that we should be eating and producing and growing. And so there's increasing marketing of indigenous green leafy vegetables in urban markets, which wasn't there earlier on in my earlier days in Papua New Guinea. It was always in rural markets, but not in urban markets. But now they're going back into urban, going into urban recognition. That's what I should say. What are these? Well, these are vegetables that were there before the 1870 colonization, when a whole lot of things were came in. You could almost call them invasive species, if you like. A whole lot of crops, food crops, came into Papua New Guinea and began to replace traditional crops that. If we look at pre-colonial, I call them pre-colonial. That's the best way of looking at them. There's some over 40 species that are recognized as being good vegetables, and there's been little attention to them, most of them, and they have great potential for exploitation. In the paper that we wrote, which you may get at some stage, we listed 25 species. Just to give you some idea of the range, these are green leafy vegetables that are common in the highlands. And I'll say a little bit more about the nutritional value in a minute. They are obviously green leafy vegetables are important nutritionally. We know that, or we should know it if we don't. And so but these vegetables become important in times of stress, and so a number of them are obtainable in the forest. They're non-timber forest products, and so it's important that these that knowledge of these remains recognized knowledge. And I just had one student just did a study in one of the highland communities in terms of how they cope with drought, and he came up with 12 green leafy vegetable species that were important to the people at the time, during the time of drought. So there are a number of stresses which I've already mentioned, I think, earlier on today, in terms not just of climate change, but population pressures, declining garden areas per family, and declining soil fertility because of the enormous problem of population increase. And so there are increasing demands for income, and the marketing of these green leafy vegetables is a source of income, because you need some income for various purposes to live in the modern world. So it's interesting that these 6 species, this is in lowlands, it's this review of literature which I did some years ago. These were the 6 main sources of green leaves. You'll notice that taro is there's a taro leaf, not taro root. It's the same plant, but although we don't make palasami, we do. That was an important green, the leaf of the taro. IBK is this slippery cabbage you have in other parts of the Pacific. Alpa is amaranthus. There's several species. This was my favorite vegetable. Tulip is a small tree, and Valangur is an interesting one because it's not common across the country, but it's grown as a hedge in East New Britain, or in New Britain Island. It's grown as a hedge, so people have it there. So when you're driving down the road, I mean, all the village is lined with this hedge of Valangur, and they can harvest those leaves at times of need. And this is nightshade, Solanum nigrum caraca. So these were there. Now there's been some changes. If we look at what is now commonly sold in the markets, if you go to Goroka market, you find on highlands, you go to lowlands first. Ibika, the slippery cabbage, is still important. Alpa is important, and the nightshade is important. So these were the 3 dominant indigenous green vegetables that were being sold in lowland urban markets. In the highlands, we have this one, rumia, which is a very nice vegetable. It's a small leaf which is variegated. There's a lot of variation between varieties, but it's important. It's a nice vegetable. I like it. And these 2, I like both of them. This other ones, I don't like them so much. And then we have these ficus species, which are both cultivated and available in the wild state. So the leaves, not the fruits we're talking about the leaves as a green leafy vegetable. And then there are a number of ferns. I'll say something else about ferns in a minute. They are clearly, because they're indigenous, they can have this ability to cope with environmental adversity, tolerant to non-invasive pests and diseases, and they're grown without input. If you're going to grow carrots, well, not carrots are not green, but if you're growing if you're growing cabbages and Chinese cabbages and broccoli and cauliflower, then you have to put fertilizers and you have to put pesticides and they become expensive. Whereas these local vegetables, they don't cost so much to grow, and so they're grown organically by default anyway. So they're important in times of climate change, which is just increasing frequency of climatic variability. It's not so much that the temperature is rising or falling, but we're just getting more and more frequency of adverse events like droughts or frosts or excessive rainfall events. So interesting one that's interested me. I've had a student working on this just last year and so on. He's now again still eating of ferns is a widespread practice, and we have recognition of 68. I don't know how accurate that particular figure is, but that's what the literature is telling us. My student did study in a particular area in Chimbu province, which is Highland province, next to ours. Those people recognized with him 14 named types of fern which were used by those people. Funny, we had 14 whatnots earlier today, and then we had 16 of the other and then we got 14 of these. I don't know why 14 becomes a magic number, but these are important, and along with the ferns, along with these ficus species, there are two, a number of different species is the important one, the Highland Kapiak, but there are several other species of fig. So they are trees with a leaf, and the tulip. This is not tulip like a Dutch tulip. This is tulip, meaning two leaves. Tulip. Yeah. So they have leaves in pairs. So it's called tulip. See, this particular species. Well, here's the ferns. Just an example of a ferns for sale in the Goroka market. And here's I don't know if you can see that. There's a shot in the Goroka market where we get our vegetables. They got ferns growing in the, for sale here, and other things, but that's Goroka market. It doesn't show the animals which get wandering around in there, pigs and cows, but that's where we do our shopping. And so we are continuing work on concentrated now in the Highlands. Earlier work I did was in the coastal, in the lowlands, when I was at the Vudal, which is now University of Natural Resources and Environment, and previously, so we were doing work on the lowland species. Now I've moved to the highlands, so we're working on the highland species. So we have these two important highland vegetables and the ferns. So this sort of group of plants here is what I'm concentrating on at the moment, and we are looking at the importance of, by interviewing families, importance of these greens in diet, and the use of necessity for retaining the use of traditional greens in diets for purposes of nutritional value. and they are important components of climate change coping strategies, and they have become an increasing source of income for families. What I haven't said is that I mentioned and showed a picture of a Goroka town market, but in Papua New Guinea we have enormous numbers of roadside markets where people just sell food beside the road. Occasionally it's cooked food, but generally speaking it's just traditional staples like sweet potato, taro, bananas, cassava, yams, depending where you are, and green vegetables. They're roadside markets. People bring their thing there. They want a bit of cash. They bring their things to the roadside. People going up and down, they buy it. And we have another category of people who are called resellers. They go to the Goroka market, they buy stuff, and then they take it to another part of the suburban areas, or they come up to the campus and they have another little market, so they resell. So if I need some fresh bananas for my breakfast, I can go down to the gate of the university. I can buy some bananas which somebody else has bought from somewhere else and brought it. Yeah, so I pay a bit more, but that's okay. So we're still working on these, evaluating what we have found so far. I think is that all of these greens have good value in terms of vitamins, minerals content, high protein content, and it's important that I think in traditional diets, greens were a significant component of the protein intake of people's diets. Because if they were living on the staple, which is staple of banana or sweet potato or taro or yam, they were the main staples earlier on, pre-colonial, that unless you were on the coast and had fish, for the rest of the people, green leafy vegetables were a significant component of their protein intake. And it was very important, and that continues to be important, because not everybody can afford meat. I mean, if you've got 80% of your population of 9 million people, so you've got an awful lot of people who are basically feeding themselves from their gardens. They are able occasionally to have pig meat or goat meat if you're a 7-dayer, or fish. But for most people, a significant part of their protein intake comes from green leafy vegetables. And so they are, it's difficult to say this one better than that one. They're all good. The only thing I can say for some provocative statement is that they are nearly all better than cabbage in terms of nutritional value. So they're a significant source of income for rural subsistence gardeners. Okay. I think that's it. There we are, just to show that this is the ficus. It's one of the Demeropsis, ficus Demeropsis, and you see people who eat these greens are healthy people.